I'm going to share some thoughts about how to design a game to children. Specific for Jiu Jitsu, of course. How to design it, what are the criteria? These are thoughts on my head. I haven't previously prepared anything, so these ideas, they may evolve as I acquire more knowledge and experience. The first thing is, what is a game? What's a game? A game, you can have different definitions of a game. The game can be recreational, meaning that it's the activity or an activity that a person engages for fun. So there's this element of fun, of enjoyment, joy. And there is more utilitarian definition of a game, that the games are for a purpose. They're exercise of control systems in which there is an opposition of forces confined by a procedure and rules in order to produce a disequilibrium outcome. So it's a game where we have a specific objectives with different parties. Each party is trying to exert control over the other party, or the other party is opposing each other, of course, and the game is limited by rules and limited by the way people proceed in order to achieve a specific goal, where in the outcome there will be at least one winner, or there will be a winner, or a group of winners. How can we transfer this to Jiu Jitsu and to children lessons? When you get to design an exercise or a game, we have to have some things to be taken into consideration. Let's get 4 things here. The game has to be enjoyable. The game has to be doable. The game has to be challenging and has to be specific. Enjoyable, doable, challenging, and specific. Let's go one by one. Enjoyable. Kids, children, they learn playing. They engage the world in a playful manner. So any game or any exercise has to have a level of playfulness, a certain level of playfulness. I'm not very happy and having a bunch of children making 100 repetitions of a certain movement just because they have to learn a certain technique. I think that it kills motivation, and the children, they have to be motivated by playing. So there must be a level of fun when they're playing the game. Okay, you can add a level of fun in the way you design the game. If you use props, if you use tools or props for the game itself, if you create certain rules within the games where the kids will enjoy when engaging with the game. There are different ways of doing this. So the game has to be enjoyable. Has to be enjoyable, number 1. Number 2, has to be doable. Children, they go through different developmental stages, and it depends on each person characteristics, each person's stage of development, each person cognitive and physical capacities, each person's cognitive, mental and physical stage of maturity. They will be able to achieve, they will be able to do certain tasks or not. If you're talking about movements and even understanding what is going on, it's different if you have a 4 or 5 years old child than 8 or 9 years old child. There are certain things the 5 years old child won't understand, even if you create an enjoyable game and you have a set of rule sets that the 5 years old won't understand. And in contrast, if you have a 9 years old that is more mature cognitively, and you will be able to understand certain more complex rule sets or strategies or objectives. And physically as well, there are certain movements that a 9 years old will be able to perform that the 5 years old won't be able to perform. So it has to be doable according to the physical and cognitive capacity of the children, or the cognitive and physical, children's cognitive and physical capacity. So it has to be enjoyable. Number one, it has to be doable. You have to take this into consideration. So when you design the game, in order to be doable, you have to know what the children limitations are. You know your child, you know his or her age, you know how much they can understand and how much they can perform, and you have to make specific for this child or group of children. Number three, challenging. The game must be challenging at a certain extent, but challenging and doable. There should be an equilibrium there. You can't have a game that's so easy that everyone can do and is not challenging at all, because it's going to become boring. It won't be enjoyable. But you have to do something that is challenging enough that the children can still perform. It's still doable, but they have to struggle at a certain level in order to perform the game. And there are different ways to do so. We can start with a level of complexity, a game with a certain level of complexity that everyone can do it, and this will be your thermometer. Is it too complex? Let's make it simpler. The rule sets must be simpler, the objectives must be simpler, the game itself must be simpler, and then the same game, you can gradually increase the level of complexity to make it more and more challenging, up to the point that is, you see that it's still doable. They can achieve the objectives, so most of them can achieve the objectives, or they will achieve the objectives as they perform this game over and over again by acquiring the mental and physical attributes that require them to complete the specific game. Number three, challenge. So it has to be enjoyable, doable, and challenging. And finally, specific. Specific to what? Specific to the objectives of the week's monthly training we are having. Specific to the objectives we have in helping these children to acquire certain skills that will help them in doing Jiu Jitsu. So it has to be specific to that. It has to have a level of specificity. In this case, when we design the game, we think about the game. We have to take into consideration what we are doing. What is this game for? For instance, we are working. Imagine we're working on closed guard during this season, no, for decision, closed guard decision, and we need we need the children to learn the basics of closed guard. I'm giving you an example on the back of my mind. Posture and leg strength. For instance, no guard, close guard, the person on their knees, they have to keep a good posture. It requires them to have a certain level of core strength, abs and back strength in order to hold themselves up, and they have a neck strength as well. So they need to develop these muscles, not only the muscles but also the motor skills that will help them to keep themselves upright when or on their knees. And the person doing guards, the person with the legs around the other person on their knees, has to have a certain level of leg strength and coordination in order to keep the guard closed. So you have two different attributes, and you need to create a game around this situation. So we have a specific situation that you may design the game that you will use props, you will use some tools that will help the children to learn these different attributes. You will design exercises and gamify this exercise in order to help them to increase their motor skills and strength on these specific parts of the body. Or you have the game with the children interacting with each other in a specific situation. So it has to be transferable. If you use tools or any game where you have the kids playing a situation, playing around the situation, you have to make sure that it's transferable. There's a certain level of transferability to the actual Jiu Jitsu combat. Let's imagine neck strength. Now you have to have a certain level of neck and back strength, to be upright. However, the game you create, it will improve the child to improve the child's muscle around the neck and back. However, it's not very transferable to the situation itself. So you have to think about how it can be transferable enough that you don't have to teach the same thing twice. There's a level of distance from having the kids in actual combat where they will be sparring with each other from the close guard to when the child is interacting, is either doing exercise by himself or doing exercise in a group in a playful manner, or doing exercise or playing games using with the help of props or tools. It could be balls, could be rings, could be cones, could be different tools that you can use to create different games. So you have to take into consideration if there's a low level of transferability from the game itself to the Jiu-Jitsu proper, the combat situation, then we have to think about how then, if you want to use these games, because the game has to be enjoyable, and having kids just fighting over and over again may not be enjoyable for many children. So we have to think about that as well. You can just put them in the closed guard and let them fight. However, there you have to take into consideration children's personalities, temperament, and how much you can push this child, because it can be not very motivating when the child is over and over again doing sparring, and some people will win, some people will lose, and if there's a child that's always losing, so you have to be careful with that, otherwise this child will lose their motivation and coming back to training. Another thing is safety as well, how safe it is to put the child in the situation over and over again if the body is not actually prepared. There are lots of things that we have to take into consideration. If the game has little transferability to the situation, then we have to have strategies thinking about how can we create the conditions in learning the skills on the game, and then to transferring these skills to the combat, to the Jiu-Jitsu proper, in a way that it's easy for the children to understand. Okay, so these are my thoughts today about how to design a game to children. 4 things we have to think about: is the game enjoyable? Is the game specific? Is the game doable? Is the game challenging? And then you have to think about what a game is. I personally call them games: specific training, positional training. I have different ways of calling it, but we can put everything inside, especially for children, inside the game box, which is something that they do for fun, and also they are trying to exert control on the other party, opposing each other. There are some rules within this situation, and we have an objective, we need to produce an outcome, and in the outcome, one person will win and the other person will lose. Just to finish with this note, because we work on martial arts combat sports, it's very important that children from early age, they start learning that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. However, it is very difficult and something to be taken into consideration when we have children 6 years or younger, up to 5 years old, some 6 years old kids as well. They are too immature to understand winning and losing. In this case, for these groups, you have to design, even if you want to work the same attributes for 9 years old and 5 years old, the outcome has to be designed differently. Cheers!